all-knowing and all-powerful, starting with the elderly wolf uncle. Chapter 43. I advise you not to continue to waste your tongue. I will not rent you the only room left in the end. The landlady, who is more than half 100 years old, has a waist full of fat and flesh, pinching her waist and holding her waist with high spirits. And her eyes behind her sunglasses are full of meanness. This lady, I think we still have room for discussion on this issue, and I don't care about increasing the rent. The boy had a smile on his face and was very insistent on renting a house. Clark Kent noticed this and shook his head with a smile. When he first came before, he also wanted to rent the newly renovated room. But the landlady firmly refused on the grounds that it was impossible to rent the new house to young people who did not know how to cherish it. Nope. Sure enough, the landlady opposite the teenager shook her head and insisted, no matter how much money you pay, I won't rent the room to you. Quote, alas, this lady, I think that a kind person like you must not bear that I can't rent a suitable room and affect my studies, right? After being rejected, the yellow-skinned boy looked a little distressed, and a strange light flashed under his slightly squinted eyes. With an invisible fluctuation spread. But Krakow, who watches everything? Kent, unaware of an invisible spiritual fluctuation emanating from the teenager, enveloped the landlady in front of him. He raised his eyebrows and muttered to himself, I have also used this set of praise and then miserable rhetoric. This woman will calmly accept your praise, and will still refuse. Quote, however, the change in the situation outside the door then surprised Clark Kent's expectations. You're right, I'm really kind. Moreover, if it is not a good thing to affect your studies because you cannot rent a suitable house. Quote, the landlady's frown suddenly stretched out after the words were general, forget it, then the room will be rented to you, you must take good care of it. Quote, the yellow-skinned boy smiled and thanked him, and then prepared to pay the rent. Clark Kent was a little surprised when he saw this. Meanwhile, the young man with a well-proportioned figure and a slightly slender figure and a beautiful face outside the door was none other than Chen Tian, who had just arrived in the metropolis. I didn't expect to rent a house here, you need to solve it with spiritual ability. Having just paid 3 months' rent, he looked at the landlord in front of him and was secretly helpless, and the landlord unexpectedly felt that the more he looked at Chen Tian, the more he felt that this teenager looked very kind. After taking out the key and handing it to him, he enthusiastically took Chen Tian to see the room. Not bad. Chen Tian looked at the room he rented, and indeed as the other party said, it was a 2-room and a living room that had just been renovated, and only then nodded with satisfaction. Although he can return to the Marvel world at night, it will be more convenient to have his own place to stay here. Of course, in addition to having a foothold here, more importantly, there is a future Super Clark Kent. This not only increases the chances of oneself and contact with the other party, but also facilitates more opportunities to obtain supernatural abilities. In the end, Chen Tian's appearance in the metropolis was entirely because of Dachau. Thoughts go on and on. The landlady standing at the door seemed a little reluctant. Chen, if you need help with any trouble in the future, you can also come to me at any time. Click. At this time, the door opposite the room was pushed open. Hello. A tall 19-12-year-old young man walked out, wearing square-framed glasses revealing Ruya Sven, and saw Chen Tian say hello. Chen Tian saw Clark Kent was slightly stunned. The reason why he chose to rent in this apartment is because he knows that the other party is here. Different due to different periods of the great superpower, the young segment of the awakening ability has a gap of O, and does not know the Clark of this universe. Kent, what stage of awakening has it been? He couldn't help but think in his heart, and at the same time greeted the other party kindly. Chen, this is Clark Kent. At this time, the landlord enthusiastically introduced the other party to Chen Tian. This is Chen, the new tenant opposite you. Then towards Clark Kent introduced Chen Tian. Clark, after Kent knew the other party's name, he nodded with a smile, and then glanced at Chen Tian with some strangeness. Unexpectedly, the landlord refused to rent his room before, and he rented it to the other party so easily. But he didn't care too much. After a couple of casual conversations, Clark Kent was ready to leave. I'm going to report to college. Today is my first day of class, so I can't be late. Quote, Clark, are you taking classes at Metropolitan University? Chen Tian asked in confusion when he heard this. Yes. Clark Kent nodded, and at the same time his eyes lit up and he hesitated. Are you too? It seems that we are actually alumni, and I came to school on my first day. You wait a little for me to put things away, and we'll go over together. Chen Tian said with a smile. Good. Clark Kent also laughed after confirming that the other party was his alumnus. He didn't expect to meet alumni, and he was new to life, and he also hoped to have another friend. Thereupon, when Chen Tian went back to finish putting his things, because the residence was close to the school, the two chose to walk to the school together. On the road, how did you choose to travel so far to Metropolis? The university in Gotham should be no worse than here. When Clark Kent was a little surprised when he learned that Chen Tian was from Gotham, after all, it was a very famous city. That place is full of crazy people, no one knows if there will be a sudden war corpse of unknown origin at your doorstep the next day. Chen Tian shook his head and shrugged, his words were full of embarrassment, and he said the same as the real thing zero, there are only crazy people and normal people in the world. Quote, Clark Kent made a joke when he heard this. And yet, at this time, the two had only walked for a while, and a few gangsters suddenly walked out of the roadside. Hey, two highly talented college students, to celebrate your admission, don't you mind if we take some money to buy alcohol, right? The person at the head walked in the front with a sinister smile, and his tone was frivolous. He wears a vest, his arms and neck are covered with tattoos, and he is very skilled in dancing a butterfly knife, which is dazzling. While this guy is talking, The other gangsters had already separated tacitly and surrounded Chen Tian and the two. It looks like they're ready to wrap him up, and after seeing this, Chen Tian did not feel much surprise. After all, although the major crime rate of the metropolis is not as good as that of Gotham, there are still countless criminals. Robberies like this can be seen everywhere. However, he was not in a hurry to make a move on the gangsters in front of him. He wanted Clark Kent stepped in to solve the matter so that he could get the latter's abilities. In his thoughts, he set his sights on the latter. Although Chen Tian's strength now completely exceeds that of ordinary people, after all, the American team, but from the outside, it is a little slender. And Clark, even if Kent does not mention superpowers, he is tall and burly just looking at his size. In such a situation, how can he strike first? Pity. Obviously, Chen Tian overestimated the great Chow of this period, and he was just a fledgling young man now, and the childishness on his face had not dissipated. On the first day of school, face a few punks. Clark Kent didn't want to cause trouble. As for breaking the bank, he had money in his wallet all over his body, but only a few loose change, just to prevent this. The leader of the punk searched his whole body, and his face was a little disgusted. Boy, what young man will go out with just a few bucks? The gangster leader was a little dissatisfied and shoved his wallet back into Clark's pocket. Clark, you. Chen Tian felt a little speechless watching this scene happen, then sighed secretly, took a step forward and pinched the wrist of the gangster leader holding the money. I always think that you make this money too easily, and I have to let you taste what life is beaten. He frowned slightly, stared at the other party and said, let's just say that you're nowhere near as smart as your friends, and a little too daring. The gangster leader looked at Chen Tian's slightly slender figure, first smiled disdainfully, and then his face instantly darkened. Because he found that the other party's arm was obviously thinner than his, but the palm was like a solid iron tong, no matter how hard he tried, he never shook at all. Fack. The gangster leader cursed angrily, and the butterfly knife in his other hand stabbed directly towards Chen Tian's abdomen with annoyance. Chapter 1 Previous Chapter 43 186 Next chapter Epilogue Table of Contents